Hello, I'm Claire Poole and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast, the show in which you get the inside track on all things sport and sustainability globally. Join me every week where I'll be chatting to a special guest about news, opinion and insights on how sport is moving to a more environmentally friendly future or taking action on climate change. Please note this episode was recorded before the passing of the Queen. Sustainable Golf Week is mentioned as the 18th of September. This is now taking place 3rd of October. Hi everyone and welcome to the Climate of Sport podcast with me, Claire Poole. Delighted to be with you this week and delighted to be joined by a wonderful guest, Jonathan Smith, who's the Executive Director of the GEO Foundation for Sustainable Golf. Jonathan, it's so lovely to have you with us.
Thank you, Claire. Lovely to be here.
So exciting. We were just talking before we hit record there about how long, 2017, I think it was, that we met. But it's so lovely to have this chat with you. So what I want to start off with, as always, is a bit of background on you so that people understand who you are and where you've come from. So tell us, for those who don't know, about your journey with sport and sustainability. How did you land into this role and where did it start?
All right, Claire, thanks. 2017 seems like quite a long time ago, but I'm actually going to go back to sometime in the 1990s. So I was a student at Sandhurst University, played golf, studied geography during that time, managed to work with the R&A on the Open Championship, which was really interesting to see a major golf event and how it was put together and so on. And then after a few years of environmental education, land management, I did a little bit of marine biology research as well thrown in. I've finally sort of found my place in the golf industry. I was employed by the Scottish Golf Union back in 1996. I think at that time it was one of the first environmental manager kind of posts within a golf association, maybe within sports associations actually, and really just started to get under the skin of kind of golf, the environment. Sustainability was used at that term, but kind of very loosely. So I've been through that sort of migration from let's talk about wildlife to let's talk about environmental protection to now let's talk about sustainable development, which has been fascinating. So I did that for 10 years. During that time, there was a growing sort of international collaboration working groups from the US, Asia, and Europe looking at the golf industry and kind of how it needed to gear up. It had image issues. It didn't really understand its environmental and social performance and value particularly well. There was quite a lot of research going on, but quite sort of turf grass orientated and quite focused. So, but that international working group led a few of us to think that, it might not be a bad idea to create a non-profit that just focuses on helping the industry accelerate into this space. So that was 2016, and that's been the last 16 years actually has been founding the GEO Foundation and helping it move forward. So somehow or other, my entire career has been in sustainable golf, and through that time, things like going back to Nairobi years ago, the UN Environment hosted a number of sustainable sport meetings. SANSI, Green Sports Alliance, Sport Positive, yourself. We've sort of really tried to be involved in the wider sustainable sport world and learn from it and contribute to it. So that's been really interesting. IOC, some of the connections there, and then sharing with tennis, with equestrian, one or two other individual sports that have kind of we've learned from and they've kind of learned from our journey. So great. I tell you what a great career to have. I have to say, incredible,
and a whistle stop tour there of the last the last 30 plus years, 40 years, incredible. So, for those who don't know, it was GEO Foundation for Sustainable Golf. It's a really interesting organisation for me, for sure, is in our conversations over the years in terms of where you sit, because you are obviously supporting the golf organisation, but equally, I think you are, pushing them as well. So tell everyone who's listening about sort of what the organisation does, who it serves, and where you see your role fitting globally for golf.
Yeah, so we're a non-profit organisation, an NGO that is effectively is a sort of a foot in both camps. I mean, we're kind of partly outside golf and looking objectively at the issues that golf faces and the opportunities and challenge that golf has in sustainability. But then we're also, really keen to be engaged in the industry. We absolutely did not want to be an NGO that was a sort of watchdog or anything like that. I mean, you can't make an omelette if you're not in the kitchen, kind of thing. So we wanted to be in the industry and active and supportive. I mean, our culture in the organization is like a caddy, like a good caddy. So a good caddy is there to, primarily, they want their player to score well and to do well. And that's what we want for golf, is to do well through sustainability and do well for the game, but do well for society at the same time. But good caddies also kind of point out where there might be flaws in the swing, or, somebody's flying at the flag a bit too directly, you might want us to play a bit safer, or in this case, not play safe, but be ambitious. So that's our culture, and our main aims are to help improve the sustainability, the social environmental performance of golf where it needs to improve. To use that evidence to help enhance the image and reputation of the sport, and then use that platform to inspire and influence, many people, fans, the business community, local communities, etc. So that's our main goals, and we advocate and we help strategize, and we help with industry engagement. We've worked really hard on a bundle of programs and tools. We call them on course, which are custom built programs for sustainable golf for almost all parts of the sector. We track a lot of data and indicators, sort of evidence, and that feeds into help people report. And then we like to sort of communicate and sort of circle back success stories back into the industry as part of the industry engagement. So we do a few things, and we run a certification scheme. It's another tool in the toolkit for a sector. So a few different things that we do. And behind all of that, we actually do quite a lot of sort of informal research and innovation. We're always looking at indicators. We're looking at ecosystem services, natural capital, carbon accounting, and all of that sort of stuff. So we spend a lot of time outside golf in the mainstream world of sustainability, production, consumption, supply chains, land use, all of those sort of big areas, corporate sustainability. And then we look at that and think, okay, how do we build that into the culture and the practices of the golf industry and the structure of the golf industry? Try to be very collaborative. We're not here to govern or dictate or anything like that. We're just here to try and help be a catalyst, a facilitator, maybe for some things that the industry might not do itself or be aware of, or might not do as quickly as kind of, need to be done. So
and I know you've been, as part of your role, I know from our work together and with UN Sports for Climate Action framework, you've been instrumental in a lot of golf organizations, venues, tours making commitments to UN Sports for Climate Action framework and helping guide them on that journey. How is that received in terms of organizations when you chat to them about, what's out there and what's happening? How does that work? And how would you say that's received in terms of making these commitments and driving action?
I think we typically start with sustainability strategies for different parts of golf, like where are they at now, and where do they want to go? And obviously climate action is a huge strand through that. It's not the only strand. There's a lot around nature protection and conservation, a lot around circular economy. There's a lot around social, not just social responsibility, but social value within the golf sector. So that's one strand. But I think what we're about is kind of, helping those golf associations really understand how most effectively they're going to take that whole sustainable development agenda forward, map to the UN SDGs and all of that kind of good stuff. And then once they get into that, I think they feel more comfortable that, we should stretch ourselves here. We should join with some of these targets that are out there, not just the goals, but the actual targets that things like the UN Sport for Climate Action embodies. So it's a bit of a pipeline in a way from raising awareness within golf bodies, helping them get moving in a way that they can really understand and take ownership of, and then connect them into some of these other pan sport kind of frameworks.
And with that in mind, then, sort of, as you mentioned there, the catalyst of this change, from your view, you've obviously, you work globally, obviously, and the role that you take within the golfing community from a macro level of the industry, specifically thinking about golf and being that catalyst for golf. Talk to us about the challenges or the barriers you come up against when you are trying to push this forward, or the challenges, the barriers actually that golf is facing when you talk to them about these potential opportunities?
Yeah, I think there's some logistical challenges within golf. I mean, there's a lot of different organizations and things like that. So what is emerging actually is a lot of individual action within golf that's becoming increasingly aligned. So in a way, we're kind of getting through that particular challenge of consensus and almost like unity within the industry. That can be a difficult thing when it's the amateur game and the professional game and, you know, different geographies. But we are seeing a lot of alignment around those strategies. So that's great. I think there's like most sports and most sectors, there's a capacity challenge, you know, that there's a hugely growing need to do something and be seen to do something. And the issues are getting bigger. They're not getting, you know, and the speed and the urgency is getting greater. So I think, like many sports, you know, how that then becomes something that the sport is able to invest in to the right to a level that is kind of aligned with the scale of the issues is an interesting one. I mean, I'd say that's a challenge not just in golf but many sports, particularly on the amateur side, where, you know, maybe there's just not a lot of extra resource available. So that takes time. And then technically, you know, golf does have it's a meeting place, golf, of, you know, communities, nature, and resource consumption. And so it does a lot of good things already. But on the resource side, there's particular challenges, and water, not least, being one of those. But there are others around travel and transportation and carbon and sort of achieving net zero targets. There's some others around urbanization and like the way that people look at green space and land. And the pressure and the value that's placed on that. So we do see in cities that are growing questions being asked about golf's productivity or its value, and some pressure on golf there. So there's a few sort of technical challenges out there that we're definitely seeing them become more relevant, more pressing in different parts of the world. So let's start with just drilling a little bit more on the nature or biodiversity side, because that's a big opportunity. We've seen a lot of stuff over the year in terms of at the edges of golf courses, etc., rewilding and biodiversity. Would you say that's a big part of the contribution of golf in terms of its impact? How do you see that? How have you seen it evolve, and how do you see that continue to evolve? So there's about 39,000 golf courses around the world, and they occupy, it's the usual sort of analogy, it's either Wales or Belgium. They occupy the world in something similar to that. And off that land, about 50% typically is nature and 50% is playing surface. And we have definitely seen through costs like energy and water, you know, the costs of those resources. We've seen a big naturalization agenda across the golf industry in the last 5 years, I would say. And it's a business decision. And the greenkeepers are right at the forefront of that. You know, they want these courses to be wonderful places to play, but also nature reserves at the same time. So, you know, a lot of really inspiring examples. And the good thing about naturalization is it does have a direct knock-on effect with fertilizer use, any other form of chemical use if it's permitted, water and irrigation, compost, materials, staff time, diesel, petrol. I mean, everything starts to go down when you naturalize the course. And sometimes you can find other places for other people to play as well, like, you know, a footpath or a cycle path or a horse riding path or whatever it might be. So that's been a hugely important trend, not just because the world's biodiversity is under threat and we need, you know, even our gardens and all our green spaces to be as ecologically rich as they could be. But there's all this other sort of knock-on effect, and we're seeing carbon footprints of golf clubs go down significantly when they don't irrigate as much or they don't import as much material.
Yeah, absolutely. And being privileged enough to have a garden, I would say my garden is being very effectively rewilded by how busy I am and unable to tend to it in any way. So, you know, ecological benefits everywhere.
No Mow May was hugely successful at teams.
Exactly. That's got into No Mow in September now. Is getting offensive. So the biodiversity side's, you know, one where we're seeing positive gains, and then the water side that you mentioned, of course. Pertinent to mention a story from France quite recently where there was a water ban when the country was experiencing severe drought and some French villages were short of drinking water, that golf courses were exempt for that. And activists took exception to that and started filling some golf courses in the south of France with cement, sort of show their displeasure at that. Something I think we're going to see a lot more across all sports. The most recent story is in golf. It's going to affect all sports, but tell me about your thoughts on that when it comes to water and kind of what the future might hold in terms of how we might need to manage that or what impact it might have.
Yeah, well, over the years, we've seen various sort of phases of sort of anti-golf campaigning and, that kind of sort of drawing attention to the fact that, people think golf's unsustainable or a luxurious use of resources and things. I mean, I think it's going to, what that example shows is something that I think we're going to see more of. I mean, with the extreme heat we're getting and the frequency of droughts and extreme flooding as well on the other side, in terms of, having, it's dry at times, but it's also, wetter and more risky in terms of flooding at times. I think this is just the start of a public pressure directed towards not just golf, it will be directed towards anything where the public sort of, has a question mark or a concern. And I think it's really important to say that concern is legitimate. I mean, that public concern about heat and water and drought is legitimate. I don't think people who are concerned are extremist or, there'll be families and, people in communities who just are concerned. We don't really know what the water situation here is, the hydrological situation, the aquifer, whatever it might be. And we don't know what that's going to do for us in terms of our life, but we can see other people using water and why are they using that water. So I think that's really important that, this is something that golf needs to appreciate is a concern and then be seen to do absolutely as much as it can about it. And it's a challenge because it's a big dependency for golf. It's a bit of a liability in a way. Yeah. So what are these solutions? And there's a lot going on in golf in terms of solutions to make sure that on the performance side, for example, the water that is used to irrigate is the lowest quality water that can be used to irrigate that golf course.
Yeah.
Because that makes a difference in terms of potability versus other uses. Yeah. So it's from recycled, harvested sources. There's actually quite a lot that can be done in terms of golf courses being good for communities in terms of flood alleviation in the winter and storing that water so that it doesn't flood houses downstream and then having that water to top up during the summer. There can be those kind of win-wins. And then irrigation has to be, like I said before, naturalized courses with absolutely targeted irrigation, the ability to go to just tees and greens, which are only about 2 to 3% of the golf course is tees and greens. And from a golfing product point of view, that's the part that matters most. Yeah. I think in some provinces in France, they allowed the continued use of water for tees and greens, and in other provinces, they said no water at all. Yeah. I think it's the golf industry's role to get out and show that this is the performance that's expected within the industry, and these are the innovations and solutions, and then to get that message out so that the perception from the public's point of view is maybe a more informed and realistic one. Yeah. But there will at times be pinch points and an increasing number of them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing, say, for example, in professional football, we're seeing a lot of major football clubs now do things like rainwater collection, irrigation, etc. I guess. Are those solutions are they rolled out? Are they being investigated?
Yeah, there's a lot of investment in golf at the minute around rainwater harvesting, surface runoff, like attenuation, like I mentioned, reed bed systems and things like that. Yeah. So grey water kind of treatment. Yeah. There's quite a lot around wash pads, so where wash water is used to safely wash down equipment, that it goes into a system, it's biologically treated and it comes back out again. So like closed loop water systems. And when you put all of those water technologies together alongside a golf course with absolutely the minimal turf for irrigation and an irrigation system that can hit the areas only for the few minutes that it's needed to keep the turf alive, those things really matter. But it's not a one fix issue. Yeah. It's where golf facilities really need to look at this holistically and do everything they possibly can from the sort of macro level right down to the micro level of the nozzle in the irrigation system and whether it's pointing, northeast, south or west, and whether the wind's drifting onto onto a pathway or not. Like it's got to be all parts of it.
Absolutely. And I think as well, one of the things I always come back to with golf when we think about these issues is when we think of golf, maybe, we think about Augusta or the K Club or Turmeric. We think of these really, really famous golf courses, but presumably they're the really high level professional ones are in the vast minority, and the majority of golf courses are essentially grassroots local community clubs, the same way as we'd have a rugby club or a cricket club that's manned by local community volunteers, and that presumably is more difficult for them to manage maybe these investments or this infrastructure that's needed to create these water saving opportunities.
Yeah, that's a big conversation within the sport at the minute and within the sector. Is, I mean, you're right, the vast majority of grassroots clubs, they change with the seasons. The colour, the course sort of setup, it's still possible to have a really good golf course even when it's dry or a bit droughty. But the televised golf is slightly different. The tournament golf, it's a bit like the difference between going to your local athletics track or going to the Bird's Nest Stadium. I always think of it a bit like that. And so we don't need Bird's Nest stadiums everywhere for people to do athletics. But in a way, it's quite nice to have something like that as a showcase. For where people gather for a major event. And I think golf has a few of those kind of like stadia where that it's nice that they're around and they're a big part of the culture of the game. They're a big part of the enjoyment and spectacle of the game. But just need to be careful that those venues don't dictate the expectation for golfers around the world. So there's definitely going to be a strong golfer sort of education, change of opinion. Be aware of what product you're consuming. That kind of conversation is definitely going to have to take more, be more prominent in the future within the industry, because it's a production and consumption issue. People are producing golf courses and people are consuming them, and sometimes you've got to change the consumer's choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So the water we kind of covered, and the capacity issue again. I think this is a fascinating one, because although there's a lot of sports globally that probably almost definitely have a much higher revenue, sponsorship, a lot more money swirling around it, generally I think golf is seen similar to sort of sailing as quite an elite sport, membership driven, or having, being running in certain circles to have access to this sort of facilities, etc. But the same as you've mentioned there, as across all sports, capacity is an issue in terms of for sustainability and getting these area, getting more activity happening in these areas, getting more resource investment, the money going in the right ways for sustainability, the same as we see across football, rugby, tennis, athletics, mass participation events, etc. So it's interesting as well that capacity, even with a sport that's seen as elite or seen as being quite a rich sport, has got exactly the same issues as all other sports in terms of that resource and capacity.
Yeah, I think there's some solutions there, though. I mean, and maybe this is not just for golf, but in sport in general. Two of the biggest drivers we're seeing at the minute is the corporate outlook, so the sponsors' outlook, and really, really that desire to bring their ESG and their sustainability, corporate responsibility, however they position it, into golf, and to see that activated. And that's actually a pressure in some circumstances, but it's a great opportunity. So if you're a tournament organizer or a tour or something like that, and you're on the front foot and you've got a strategy and a plan, that alignment with corporate partners can be a great place to increase capacity and increase action and increase fan engagement and all of those good things. I think that's a real that's a major focus of our work at the minute with tournaments and tours, is creating that relationship. And then actually a few things recently on the government side. Events Scotland's a good example. So part of Visit Scotland, part of the Scottish government, they put funds into tournaments in Scotland. And this year, they were really, really keen to see that sustainability wasn't just activated, but it was also tracked and monitored. Yeah. So alongside the economic value of that sport, what are the social responsibility, social value indicators that are maybe softer? Yeah. And then what are the environmental and carbon and climate indicators? Yeah. So we're doing a sort of pilot project with Events Scotland this year across 5 major events. It was led off by the Open, the Women's Open, Scottish Open, the Women's Scottish Open, the Dunhill Links, multiple tournaments. So what this is about, governments saying, we would like to see more of this. Yeah. And if you don't do it, that won't be so good for your sport or your event. If you do it, then what other incentives and almost like acceleration type funding and capacity building would the government be willing to do with you? Because if you're a sport that's out front in this, it will be a model that is relevant to other sports and sports councils and other parts of government. So I think it just pays to be on the front foot at the minute. That you've got to create your own capacity somehow, and being seen to be a leader is part of creating that capacity, attracting partners to invest in what you want to do, and align it with what they want to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the government piece incredibly important, and the point you've touched on there as well in terms of increasing capacity through partnerships, etc., is I think we're so barely scratching the surface on the opportunity there in terms of, we know money, time and resource, capacity are the biggest challenges we face with sustainability. If that can be built into purposeful activations through sponsorship, literally all of that can be built in to a package or a deal or sponsorship deals that are happening. That's a massive way we could start to overcome this. But it sounds as though it's the same in golf as in other sports, where we're really at the start of the journey on that. There is great examples of it, but we're not seeing it across the board yet, are we?
No, I think it's a bit of sort of chicken and egg. Who is going to move first? Is it the rights holders who say, dear partners, look at all the great things that we could achieve together, and go with that, practical ideas like, tried and tested activations and things like that, that then the partner looks at and says, great, we'll invest more and we can see, you've offered us something. Or does it come the other way where the corporate partner says, we'd like to do more through your sport? And sometimes it goes in different directions, but if you can create that meeting place between like a sustainability director and budget within a major corporation and the sports sponsorship team in that same corporation and the rights holder, and you can find a effective way to deliver and implement that's credible as well. It's got to be sort of solid. Then I think that's in a way that could be the sort of next wave of action and activation. It could unlock that for sport.
I think so. Yeah, I think that, and I think we're starting to see more in terms of brands who have got their own ESG or their own sustainability efforts, sort of looking at partnering with the right football club, golf course, tour, tournament, that they have the same ethos when it comes to sustainability, and therefore it's attractive for them to align. So I think you're right. What's going to go first, chicken and egg? I think in some instances we're seeing the chicken, sometimes we're seeing the egg, but I think that getting that to scale and seeing it more frequently, we're at the very start of that as well. So fascinating insights in terms of the sort of macro perspective on golf, and then exciting news in terms of, at the time of recording, in just a couple of days, we're going to have the first Sustainable Golf Week. Tell us about that. Tell us about what people can expect, what it's about, what are we going to be hearing. So it's going to be 18th to the 23rd of September 2022 for anyone who is listening to this a long time after it's released. I'm sure it's going to be an annual thing, but tell us more about it, Jonathan.
Yeah, we just wanted to create each year a focal point, to do a few things, actually. I mean, this year's called Reflect, Celebrate and Drive Further. So, the first part is reflect, just to, I guess, help golf to soak in some of these things that we're seeing accelerating, the extreme heat and the droughts and some of the pressures, and reflect on the role that golf can play, which is huge. I mean, as the sport gets mobilized, it can have a really significant, let's call it, net positive impact around the world, building on what it already does and overcoming some of those challenges that we mentioned. So that's the sort of reflect part. And then the celebrate is just what I was saying, whether it's national federations in probably 20 countries at the minute, all of the major tours are mobilizing in golf around this, governing bodies, major tournaments and events. I could drop in names, but I'm going to forget a name. So I'm just sort of talking a bit more, a bit more general. So we want to celebrate that, and last year we created a thing called the Sustainable Golf Highlights Hub. It had a few hundred stories on it. It's now got thousands on it. So, and what we are seeing is when we can start capturing some of those credible stories that are really worth celebrating. Other people are learning from it and taking action. So that's the celebrate part. And then the drive further is what's next, and what can you do? What can your club do? What can your golf development do? Your tournament? What can you do as a player? What can the media do to help, or influencers? How do we accelerate and take this even further? And it'll be a very collaborative, partner-driven thing. There'll be some core content from us around @sustainablegolf, #drivingthegreen, sustainable.golf. There's an activation kit there. So look out for that. But then there'll be contributions from lots of different people and perspectives. And we would love people to share their perspective and share their idea. And I don't know, share your concern as well. If you're depending on how you see this sort of like meeting place of golf and sustainability, please get involved and share a thought or ask a question or watch some of the content.
Yeah, and what's in the activation kit? That sounds powerful. What's you mentioned there, like a kit? If that's, I guess, hopefully for people who maybe are just at the start of this journey and raising their awareness and stuff. But what's in the kit?
Well, we're encouraging. This is really for sort of golf partners. Yeah. So have they got something to announce during the week? Yeah. Target setting, goals, maybe a new strategy that's being launched, something innovative. In the innovation sector, we work with. Sustainability relies on sort of new technology innovation. There's a lot in the supply chain. So manufacturers, suppliers releasing new products and equipment that makes the industry more sustainable. We're encouraging sort of at the national level to encourage golf clubs to tell their story, to engage with the community. So things like, education events on courses, is there a way to get the community out to the course so that they can have a tour and find out more about how the golf course is run in terms of its sustainability, maybe share some ideas locally. So trying to connect from the sort of the big organizations like, the DP World Tour have agreed to join UN Sport for Climate Action. So that will be getting announced around about this time. Right down to grassroots clubs telling their story and sharing some of the things that they do. We talk about fostering nature, conserving resources, strengthening communities, and taking climate action. So people across golf are being invited to share their stories across that theme.
Amazing. And I think, we have listeners from all different sport. And what I love about all these activations in the weeks that happen, that although it's Sustainable Golf Week, there's going to be so many learnings in there for all sport. I think that's the great thing for me in terms of sport as a sector of tackling a lot of these challenges. So many of the learnings or the announcements that are being made and the challenges that are overcome and the opportunities are fairly universal across sport, aren't they? So all the things you're talking about, whilst obviously it's a focus on golf because that's the sport you're working in, people from other sports should keep a close eye on that as well, because there's, probably loads of ideas they can get themselves about their own activations or learn about the impacts and innovations that are happening.
I think that's the big thing, and we've touched on quite a lot of sort of general subject sort of topics here. I mean, a lot of this is about really making it practical and simple, and not just the more obvious things like, I don't know, plastic bottles or replacing those, but really drilling down on your irrigation system and your water. Really looking at the golf course sort of through that lens of naturalization, thinking there's probably another hectare or half a hectare of nature that we can put into this golf course if we look really closely. Looking at the supply chain and cutting out certain types of materials. So it's about those very, very practical things that all stack up to making the whole sport more sustainable, and then giving it a very credible position to have a strong voice, sort of not just within sport, but kind of within society.
That societal angle as well, I think, is massive in terms of the communities, local to global, in terms of citizens and society and communities of where sport sits. We always come back to that in terms of, as you said, we want to get our houses in order and make the change internally, but it's the reach beyond that into communities, isn't it, at that social level where we can drive those incredible impacts. So wonderful to hear about Sustainable Golf Week. Can't wait to see the content coming out. Remind me of the website where people can go and the hashtag that they can use to get a closer look at that and keep across the content.
Yeah, you'll find the landing page at sustainable.golf and at Sustainable Golf on all of the social media platforms, and hashtag driving the green is the
driving the green
handle. Yeah.
Amazing. Perfect. So just to finish off then, so that's, let me get that shout out. They're all the website and the links, and it's going to be 18th to the 23rd of September 2022 is the first one. So keep an eye out for that. And then just to finish off, Jonathan, you mentioned at the very start of the pod how long you've sort of been working in this space. We've spoken about, you know, us meeting 5 years ago and how different things were then compared to now. Where we are right now, and with exciting initiatives like Sustainable Golf Week coming up in the near term, what's your hope for the medium to long term of sustainability in golf?
In golf, it's more commitments, more actions, more results. So that would be golf, and that's kind of our world, I guess. But more widely, well, you know, just sort of coming into this, I had a few thoughts. They're a bit philosophical, to be honest. Maybe that's a problem. So my first one was I hope the sport goes on to really be big in advocacy, because it is inspirational, and it's not just inspirational. I think sport's authentic. You know, sports people and athletes are authentic about the challenges they face and their level of performance and things like that. And I think, you know, the world needs that authentic voice around sustainability, and there's no reason it would marry very well with sport to have that, so it can reach a lot of people. But I think it can reach them quite honestly and quite on a sort of human level. And I think that's important. And I think alongside that, there's a sense of belief that sport has, which is massive, and we need that, and we might need it even more. You know, that positivity, and we can get this done, and, you know, I'm going to do it, and we can do it as a team. That all of that sort of sense of belief. I know that this is a bit sort of cheesy perhaps, but it does feel important on a philosophical ground. And then I'm going to get really boring, which is, you know, I'd like to see sport embrace systems. So and sustainability systems can be a bit boring, and they're not the most interesting thing in the world, but there's probably something about how sport and athlete, you know, monitors and tracks performance. You know, so there's the inspiration, there's the hard work, but in the middle, there's the how am I doing? Am I doing enough yet? You know, and personal best and all that kind of stuff. And I think sustainability systems, if they're used well, can be a really good sort of jam in the sandwich. And so we see some of that in sport. We've worked really hard at it at GEO, as you know, like standards, indicators, reporting, a bit of assurance thrown in. I think that can be a really good spine for the way that sport keeps it solid, or you know, it's not always easy, but tries to keep it credible and tracking and monitoring. So those would be So
I love recording these podcasts, because no matter how long you're in this, someone always says something that makes you think about things in a different ways. And I think every time I've done a pod, people like yourself, people I've known for years, and we have these chats quite frequently, something will come out of the podcast that resonates with me, and I hope it does with the audience as well. But just what you've said there about systems and the way it aligns with sport has just triggered something in me, because we hear a lot that, especially when we talk to sports organisations who are looking to sign up to the UN framework, or they're looking to commit to net zero, sometimes they're very reticent because they're like, we don't know how we're going to get there. Sort of put it akin to an athlete who's looking to win a championship or take a gold medal or win a league or whatever it is. You might not know day one how exactly you're going to get there, but you know what the end goal is, and you know that you have to chip away and keep on top of things and have the best advice and follow the best systems day to day or week to week to attempt to get there. And just that's really resonated in a different way of thinking about systems, where we often think about systems and accreditations and stuff of holding us to account and setting boundaries, but actually we need to change that, per your insight there, in terms of it's a tool to help us keep us on track and help make it more manageable to get to these big goals. Even if we don't know exactly from now to 2040 how we're going to get to net zero, we can break it down and think, if we follow the best systems and tackle it a piece at a time.
It's interesting. They could be seen as something that's external. And we're part of the ICL Alliance, which is a great group of, you know, standards and certification systems in agriculture, fair trade, Forest Stewardship Council, MSC, and things like that. And I think, they can be seen as sort of like, you know, groups who are external, who are here to check on our progress and decide whether we're whether we're worthy of recognition.
Yes.
And they don't really work like that. They're really about being something that people can internalize within their organization.
Yeah.
And that's when they're at their best. And then, of course, there's some assurance and certification needs to be done in certain ways, that recognition piece. And by the way, it doesn't close the door on awards, stories, social media, and all those other things. That's why I say certification for us is just a tool in the toolkit. But the system itself, what standards are we setting out as a sector to achieve? What's our minimum requirements now, and where do we go? Because people can start putting policies and incentives and all sorts of good things around that. What are we going to track? How are we going to start consistently reporting it over time? And more and more corporations are doing that. So if you want alignment with governments, you want alignment with sponsors, it's good for sport to be able to talk in a sort of systems way. That will be what the sustainability team in a major potential corporate partner will be. They'll be thinking like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in my head now, we need to rebrand certification standards as your coach, the manager, the coach, the person who basically is like, you need to, if you're wanting to achieve this performance, these are the things you need to go. So that's triggered something in me. So thank you for that, because that's, I think, helpful. All of these conversations build into a bigger picture. And I think a lot of this is perception. Again, a lot of the perception is, well, if we say we're going for a certification standard, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of effort. But actually, if you've made commitments, you are going to have these organizations help you get there. And if we, instead of seeing it as someone who's holding our feet to the fire, instead see it as a coach who's trying to make us achieve our best performance, it just changes the narrative. You
can see it as a bit like nutrition. For sustainable sport. Because that actually, that analysis of how you're performing can, it can show where you're a bit deficient and can improve, it can show where you're doing really well. So
good. We've hit on something there. Everybody, you are welcome. If we see that popping up in people's branding, it started here.
I'll get an award from the ICL Alliance if systems becomes nutrition for sustainable sport. That would be. I'm done.
It started here, man. This is it. But no, it's such a pleasure to talk to you and hear more. And even this is what I love, as I said, about these pods. A lot of the stuff I know that you're doing already. I'm delighted for people who are listening to the pod to learn more about the great role that you are taking on and the platform you've got to help drive sustainable development in golf. But also, we're still all learning and seeing things in a different way and continuing to progress, which always comes to my attention. No matter how many times we talk about this stuff, new stuff always comes up. So thank you so much for taking the time, and all the best for Sustainable Golf Week.
Thank you very much, Claire. Yeah, I really appreciate you sort of featuring that this week. It's really important. So thanks.
Amazing. And everybody, that was Jonathan Smith, Executive Director of the GEO Foundation for Sustainable Golf. Thanks for listening to the Climate of Sport podcast. Please like and subscribe, and get in touch if you want to share information about the work that you're doing, if you want to appear as a guest, or you want to recommend guests, or you just have ideas of conversations you'd like us to have. You can get in touch by emailing info@sportpositivesummit.com.